The Beast Pit had been feared for so long that no living civilization remembered who had first named it. Across thousands of star systems, the warning was always the same. Parents whispered it to reckless children, military instructors repeated it to ambitious cadets, and explorers spoke of it with lowered voices. Nothing enters the Beast Pit and returns. It was not a myth or an exaggeration. It was history written in vanished fleets, silent distress beacons, and endless lists of the missing. Orbiting a lonely yellow star on the edge of explored space, the planet designated BX 991 had been under absolute quarantine for more than 4,000 years. The world itself was beautiful from orbit. Vast emerald continents stretched beneath swirling white clouds, enormous mountain ranges pierced the atmosphere, and glittering oceans reflected the distant sun. Yet every ship that looked upon its beauty also saw the enormous automated defense satellites surrounding it. Ancient beyond calculation, they still functioned flawlessly, permitting entry but never allowing unauthorized extraction. Every civilization that had challenged them had failed. The oldest surviving records described the Beast Pit as a prison built by forgotten gods. Others claimed it was a failed military experiment where monsters had escaped. Some believed it was a punishment left behind by an extinct empire. No one knew which story was true because every serious investigation ended the same way, with silence. The Galactic Assembly had lost 12 scientific expeditions, 7 elite military task forces, and hundreds of autonomous drones over the centuries. Entire rescue operations had vanished while trying to recover earlier survivors. Even artificial intelligences controlling unmanned probes transmitted only fragments before their signals abruptly stopped. One recovered transmission had become famous throughout the galaxy. "We can hear them. They're surrounding us. Don't fire. Wait, no. No." The recording ended in static. No one had ever discovered what they were. Inside the massive circular chamber of the Galactic Assembly, representatives from hundreds of intelligent species filled tier after tier of floating platforms. At the center of the hall, a three-dimensional projection of BX 991 rotated slowly above the floor. Assembly Speaker Thalek, a towering silver-skinned elder whose species was known for logical precision, surveyed the chamber before speaking. "For 4,218 standard years," he said, "the Beast Pit has remained the single greatest threat within explored space. We have debated containment. We have debated extermination. We have debated permanent isolation. Today, we decide its future." The hall remained silent. A massive reptilian delegate rose from his platform. "We have delayed long enough," he growled. "Destroy the planet from orbit. Whatever lives there has consumed enough lives." Several delegates nodded. Before another speaker could respond, an insectoid ambassador lifted one of her delicate arms. "You cannot destroy an entire biosphere based on fear alone. We still do not understand what exists below those clouds. And understanding has already cost thousands of lives." Another delegate snapped. Arguments erupted across the chamber. "It is a breeding ground for predators. It may contain ancient technology. No civilization should possess creatures capable of defeating entire armies. The quarantine has held for millennia. Leave it untouched." The debate intensified until Speaker Thalek struck the floor with his ceremonial staff. "Order." The chamber gradually quieted. "As our newest member civilization," Thalek continued, "humanity has requested permission to address this assembly." Many delegates exchanged skeptical glances. Humans had joined the Galactic Assembly only 11 years earlier. Their rapid technological development had earned respect, but they were still considered inexperienced on the interstellar stage. Compared to civilizations that had existed for tens of thousands of years, humanity was little more than an ambitious newcomer. A young woman stepped onto the central platform. She wore a simple dark blue exploration uniform rather than ceremonial robes. A small Earth emblem rested on her shoulder, and a tablet hung from her belt beside a compact field notebook. Her brown hair was tied back, and her expression remained calm despite hundreds of alien eyes studying her. "My name is Mara Hayes," she began. "I'm a xenobiologist from Earth and a specialist in animal behavior and wilderness survival." A few delegates looked confused. One whispered loudly enough for nearby platforms to hear. "They sent a scientist?" Another answered with obvious amusement. A very young one. Mara ignored the murmurs. I've spent the last 6 years studying every surviving record concerning the Beast Pit. Every expedition report, every distress signal, every recovered drone log, every environmental scan. She paused while the giant hologram rotated behind her. I believe we've misunderstood the planet. The chamber erupted into laughter. One feathered delegate leaned forward. Misunderstood? He scoffed. Young human, 12 military expeditions disappeared. Another added sarcastically, perhaps the monsters simply wished to be friends. More laughter spread through the assembly. Mara waited patiently until the noise faded. Has anyone considered, she asked quietly, that every expedition entered expecting a war? Silence replaced the laughter. She continued. Every mission deployed armed soldiers, armored vehicles, combat drones, orbital overwatch, energy weapons, and explosive charges. Every mission assumed every life form on that planet was hostile before making first contact. The reptilian delegate folded his massive arms. Because they were hostile, were they? Mara asked. Or did they become hostile after heavily armed strangers invaded their territory? Several scientists exchanged uncertain looks. Mara activated her tablet. Images appeared around the chamber: wrecked armored vehicles, burned forests, destroyed nests, enormous claw marks, and the scattered remains of previous camps. These are not random attacks, she explained. They're defensive patterns, territorial responses, nest protection, resource defense. An elderly aquatic delegate frowned. You are comparing unknown apex predators with animals from your own world? Yes, Mara answered without hesitation. The reptilian delegate laughed. Your world cannot possibly prepare you for this. Mara smiled faintly. My world produced humans. The hall grew quiet again. She continued in a steady voice. Earth is classified as a Class 12 death world. Nearly every ecosystem contains predators, venomous species, environmental hazards, and rapidly changing weather. Humanity survived not because we overpowered nature, but because we learned to understand it. Speaker Thalek leaned forward. What exactly are you proposing? Mara looked directly at him. I request authorization to enter the Beast Pit. A ripple of disbelief swept across the assembly. Alone. Now even Speaker Thalek stared in silence. No military escort, Mara continued. No combat vehicles. No heavy weapons. Just survival equipment, scientific instruments, and enough supplies to establish initial observations. The reptilian delegate burst into booming laughter. You intend to survive where entire armies failed? I intend to avoid making their mistakes. Another delegate shook his head. This is suicide. Perhaps, Mara admitted, but if I'm wrong, one person dies. If I'm right, 4,000 years of fear end. For several long moments, no one spoke. Finally, Speaker Thalek asked the question everyone was thinking. If we approved this mission, when would you depart? Mara looked at the slowly rotating image of the Forbidden World. I've already packed. 3 days later, under the watchful eyes of nearly every major news network in the galaxy, a single human shuttle descended toward the surface of BX 991. No escort accompanied it. No warships flew beside it. High above, dozens of observation vessels maintained a careful distance beyond the ancient defense satellites. As the shuttle settled into a clearing surrounded by towering emerald trees, Mara secured her backpack, checked her environmental scanner, and took one slow breath. Her communicator crackled. Mara, came Speaker Thalek's voice from orbit, you may still abort this mission. She smiled to herself. If I do, she replied, we'll never learn the truth. The shuttle hatch opened. Warm, unfamiliar air drifted inside carrying the scent of rain, wild vegetation, and something ancient. Mara stepped onto the surface. Moments later, the shuttle lifted away, leaving her completely alone. Far above, millions of viewers across the galaxy watched as the tiny human figure disappeared beneath the enormous green canopy. Then the jungle swallowed her from sight. The jungle closed around Mara almost immediately. Within 30 meters, the landing site had vanished behind walls of towering trees whose trunks were wider than her shuttle. Thick emerald vines hung like curtains between branches hundreds of meters above, while enormous blue leaves shimmered with tiny droplets that reflected sunlight into dancing patterns across the forest floor. The air was warm and heavy with moisture, carrying unfamiliar scents of flowers, damp soil, and something faintly metallic. It was beautiful, but Mara knew beauty on a death world often hid danger. She crouched beside a patch of soft earth and carefully examined the ground. Several sets of tracks crossed one another. Some resembled enormous birds with 3 forward-facing claws. Others belonged to something much heavier, leaving deep impressions nearly 20 centimeters into the soil. None of them appeared fresh. Interesting, she murmured into the small recorder attached to her shoulder. High biodiversity. Multiple large species sharing the same corridor. That usually means predictable migration rather than constant conflict. Her communicator crackled to life. Mara, this is Observation Station 1, came Speaker Thalek's voice. Your vital signs are stable. We advise returning to the shuttle zone before nightfall. She smiled without looking up. There is no shuttle zone anymore, remember? You sent it back. A brief silence followed before Thalek replied, old habits. I'll establish camp before sunset, Mara assured him. So far, everything is surprisingly normal. Several assembly scientists listening through the open channel exchanged puzzled glances. Normal? One of them whispered. She's standing in the beast pit. Mara continued walking, using a handheld scanner only occasionally. Instead of constantly searching for danger, she watched the forest itself. Bright-winged creatures glided between giant branches. Small mammals no larger than rabbits darted through colorful ferns. Insects with transparent wings buzzed lazily around glowing flowers. Nothing behaved as though an apex predator lurked nearby. Then she stopped. The forest had gone silent. Not completely silent. There was still the distant sound of flowing water. But every bird-like creature had vanished into the canopy. Mara slowly turned in place. No sudden movements, she whispered to herself. A low vibration rolled through the ground beneath her boots. Another followed. Heavy footsteps. Very heavy footsteps. The observation ships immediately detected movement through orbital sensors. Multiple seismic impacts, an officer announced nervously. Large biological mass approaching her position. On the assembly observation deck, dozens of delegates leaned toward their displays. The trees ahead began to sway. Leaves rained onto the forest floor. Something enormous was coming. A colossal creature emerged between the trunks. It stood nearly 6 meters tall at the shoulder, supported by 4 immensely powerful legs covered in dark blue scales that shimmered like polished stone. Curved ivory horns swept backward from its broad skull, while golden eyes fixed directly on the tiny human standing before it. Each slow breath escaped through massive nostrils in clouds of warm vapor. Several assembly delegates gasped. The mountain beast, someone whispered. No survivor has ever reported seeing one this closely. Military officers immediately began shouting. Order her to run. Tell her to deploy emergency flares. She has to move. Thalek grabbed the communicator. Mara, retreat immediately. But Mara never looked away from the animal. Instead, she quietly unclipped a small notebook from her belt. What is she doing? Demanded an admiral. Writing, another answered in disbelief. Mara spoke softly into her recorder. Large herbivore. Estimated mass 15 to 20 tons. Elevated head posture. Ears angled forward. No charge preparation. The creature took another slow step. Then another. It was now less than 20 meters away. The officers aboard the observation ship stared in horror. Why isn't it attacking? One scientist suddenly frowned. Wait. Mara noticed something the orbital cameras had missed. Behind the giant animal, partially hidden among thick ferns, were 2 much smaller creatures. They resembled miniature versions of the adult, awkwardly trying to stand on oversized legs. She slowly exhaled. Oh, the giant beast lowered its head slightly. Not to attack, to block her view of the young. Mara nodded almost instinctively. You got babies. The animal released a deep rumbling sound that vibrated through the ground. She recognized it immediately. Warning display, she whispered. Not aggression. Mara. Thalek shouted again. Respond. Without taking her eyes off the creature, she answered calmly. I'm responding. Get out of there. I already am. Very slowly, Mara took one careful step backward. The massive animal did not move. She took another. Still nothing. Every movement was deliberate. No sudden turns. No raised hands. No direct challenge. The distance between them gradually increased. Finally, after nearly 2 full minutes, the enormous beast turned sideways, revealing the 2 young hiding behind its legs. One curiously peeked toward the human. The adult gently nudged it farther into the trees. Then all three disappeared into the forest. Complete silence filled every observation ship. One technician finally whispered, "She survived." Nobody answered. Mara released a long breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her heartbeat finally began slowing. Into her recorder she said, "First contact successful. Subject displayed exclusively defensive behavior associated with offspring protection. No predatory indicators observed." The communicator came alive again. A scientist asked cautiously, "Human Mara, are you saying that creature never intended to kill you?" "I can't prove intent," she replied, "but I can say this. If it wanted me dead, I wouldn't be talking to you." The assembly chamber erupted into confused conversations. Impossible. Every report called them bloodthirsty. Perhaps it was feeding later. Mara overheard the comments through the open channel. "No predator that size waits to attack prey standing 20 meters away," she explained. "Especially prey this small." An elderly xenobiologist asked, "Then why did previous expeditions die?" "I don't know yet." She looked toward the direction the family had disappeared. "But I know one thing." "What?" "They didn't meet that animal under these circumstances." As afternoon turned toward evening, Mara continued deeper into the jungle. She deliberately avoided following the mountain beast's tracks, respecting what she believed was its territory. Instead, she searched for water, eventually hearing the gentle rush of a stream flowing over smooth black stones. The water was remarkably clear. She performed chemical tests before filling her containers. "Safe after filtration," she reported. Mineral content is unusually high. Nearby, she discovered claw marks carved into a massive tree trunk nearly 3 meters above the ground. Instead of panic, she studied them carefully. "Territory marker," she muttered. Not far away, she found another. Then another. Each mark pointed in a different direction, almost like invisible borders. She frowned thoughtfully. "Interesting. What have you found?" Thalek asked. "I don't think this forest is random." "What do you mean?" She traced one of the claw marks with a gloved finger. "These territories barely overlap. Different species seem to respect each other's boundaries." A scientist interrupted excitedly. "That's impossible among apex predators." "Not impossible," Mara corrected gently. "Efficient." As the sun dipped below the towering canopy, golden light filtered through the leaves. Mara chose a rocky ledge overlooking the stream rather than sleeping on the forest floor. She assembled a lightweight shelter and deliberately avoided building a fire. One officer noticed. "Aren't you cold?" "It's warm enough." "Then why not make a fire?" "Because I don't know what smoke means to the local wildlife." That answer silenced everyone again. After finishing her simple meal, Mara reviewed the day's observations. No attacks. Multiple animal sightings. Healthy ecosystem. Stable water source. Clear territorial behavior. She leaned back against the rock wall and gazed into the darkening forest. Then she heard it. Far away. Metal. A faint metallic echo carried through the jungle. It lasted only a second. Mara's eyes narrowed. What is it?" Thalek asked. "Wasn't natural. Somewhere deep within the beast pit, hidden beneath thousands of years of untouched wilderness, something made of metal had just made a sound." And Mara knew with absolute certainty that she was no longer following only animal tracks. Somewhere ahead, someone, or something, had built this place. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the immense canopy as Mara packed her camp. She had slept lightly, waking several times to unfamiliar calls echoing across the valley, yet nothing had approached her shelter. That alone challenged centuries of assumptions. Every official report described the beast pit as a world where predators hunted relentlessly, yet her first night had passed without a single attack. She finished checking her equipment before speaking into her recorder. Day 2. No evidence of indiscriminate aggression. Wildlife vocalizations remained constant throughout the night, suggesting the ecosystem experiences normal predator-prey activity rather than perpetual conflict. Her communicator crackled almost immediately. Observation Station 1 to Mara. "Good morning." "Morning, speaker. We've reviewed yesterday's recordings several dozen times," Thalek admitted. "Several council members still believe the mountain beast simply wasn't hungry." Mara smiled as she adjusted her backpack. "That's because they're thinking like politicians, not ecologists." "And what would an ecologist say?" "I'd say every behavior has a purpose. Hunger doesn't explain guarding offspring." There was a thoughtful silence before Thalek answered. "Proceed carefully." "I always do." Instead of following the stream downstream, Mara headed toward the direction where she had heard the metallic sound the previous evening. The terrain gradually changed. Dense vegetation gave way to enormous black stone formations covered in thick moss. Strange flowering vines climbed across weathered cliffs, their bright crimson blossoms opening as the morning sunlight reached them. Every few hundred meters, she paused to study tracks or inspect broken branches. Several belonged to species she had not yet encountered, but none suggested chaotic movement. Animals were following established routes. After nearly 2 hours of careful hiking, she stopped beside another set of claw marks carved into a smooth rock face. Unlike the previous markings, these formed a repeating pattern. What is it?" asked one of the orbital scientists listening through the open channel. "These aren't random scratches." She measured the spacing with a folding ruler. Identical distance between every mark. "You think they're artificial?" "No." She gently brushed away centuries of accumulated moss. "I think they're maintained." The scientist frowned. "Animals maintaining territorial markers? Wolves refresh scent markings. Bears revisit scratching trees. Many Earth species maintain boundaries for generations." Another scientist interrupted. "You're suggesting these creatures have organized territories?" "I'm suggesting they're far more predictable than we've assumed." She photographed the markings before continuing. By midday, the jungle floor began sloping upward toward a series of towering cliffs. The metallic sound grew slightly clearer, though still faint enough that Mara questioned whether she was imagining it. Then she noticed something else. The trees ended abruptly. Ahead stretched a circular clearing nearly 200 meters across. Nothing grew inside it. Not a single tree. Not even grass. The soil appeared strangely smooth beneath a thin layer of moss. Mara slowly approached the edge. "This doesn't belong here." "What do you see?" Thalek asked. "A clearing too perfect to be natural." She knelt and carefully pushed aside the moss with her gloved hand. Metal. Not rusted. Not broken. Metal. Her breathing quickened. "This is impossible." The orbital scientists leaned closer to their displays. "What did you find?" "The ground." She scraped away more vegetation until a flat metallic surface reflected the sunlight. "The entire clearing isn't ground." She followed the edge for several meters. "It's a structure." Excitement spread through every observation ship. "Can you identify it?" someone asked eagerly. "Not yet." As Mara continued examining the surface, she noticed a narrow crack running across it. Kneeling beside it, she inserted the tip of her survival knife and gently pried upward. The layer of moss peeled back, revealing engraved geometric patterns beneath. Her pulse quickened. "This wasn't built recently." "How old?" "I have no idea." She ran a portable analyzer over the exposed metal. The device emitted an error tone. Then another. Finally, the screen displayed a message she had never seen before. "Material unknown." She blinked. "My scanner can't identify the alloy." Even aboard the observation ships, silence fell. Alien technology spanning thousands of civilizations filled the Galactic Assembly database. For a scanner to identify nothing meant whatever this was predated recorded history. Mara whispered almost to herself, "Who built you?" Before anyone could answer, another sound echoed across the clearing. Clang. Metal striking metal. Much louder this time. It came from beneath her feet. Every muscle in Mara's body tensed. The communicator exploded with voices. "Mara, fall back. It could be activating. Move away from the structure." Instead of running, Mara stepped backward until she reached the tree line. She watched. Nothing happened. Another metallic clang echoed upward, followed by a low humming vibration. The enormous circular platform trembled ever so slightly. Then, it stopped. The forest returned to silence. Mara frowned thoughtfully. "It wasn't reacting to me." "What then?" Thalek asked. "I don't know." She scanned the surrounding cliffs. Her eyes narrowed. There, halfway up the cliff face, almost completely hidden beneath vines, stood a rectangular opening no more than 3 meters tall. It was perfectly straight, entirely artificial. "I found an entrance." Several military officers immediately objected. "You are not going inside." "Agreed," another added. This mission was ecological observation. Mara looked up at the hidden doorway. "And now archaeology." "No. The objective has changed." "No," Thalek repeated firmly. She sighed. "Speaker. If someone built this place, the answers we've searched 4,000 years for might be behind that doorway." Before he could respond, another voice joined the communication channel. It belonged to Professor Celis, the oldest xenoarchaeologist in the assembly. Speaker, authorize limited investigation. Thalek hesitated. It could be extremely dangerous. So could remaining ignorant, Celis replied quietly. After several long seconds, Thalek finally spoke. You have permission to investigate only if you believe the risk is acceptable. Mara smiled. Understood. Reaching the entrance proved far more difficult than spotting it. The cliff offered few handholds, and loose stones repeatedly shifted beneath her boots. Twice she nearly slipped before finally pulling herself onto a narrow ledge. Standing before the opening, she brushed away thick curtains of vines. The doorway had no visible hinges. No symbols. No defensive weapons. Just smooth gray walls. She cautiously shined her flashlight inside. The beam disappeared into darkness. Cool air drifted outward carrying a faint scent unlike anything in the jungle. Clean. Dry. Artificial. This place has been sealed for thousands of years, she whispered. Professor Celis asked, can you estimate how long? No. She reached down and touched the threshold. There wasn't a single crack in the material. No erosion. No corrosion. It looked as though it had been manufactured yesterday. Taking one slow breath, Mara stepped across the threshold. Her flashlight illuminated a long corridor extending into darkness. Dust covered the floor. Nothing else. No bones. No wreckage. No signs of battle. Just silence. She took another careful step. Suddenly, soft white lights flickered on one after another, stretching far into the distance. The corridor awakened. Mara froze. The observation ships erupted into frantic chatter. It detected her. Energy signatures increasing. What just activated? Mara stared into the illuminated corridor. Somewhere deep inside the ancient structure, a machine that had slept for untold millennia had just recognized that someone had finally come home. Mara remained perfectly still as the corridor came alive around her. Rows of soft white lights continued illuminating one after another, stretching so far into the distance that their glow eventually disappeared into darkness. Nothing moved. No alarm sounded. No hidden weapons emerged from the walls. Whatever had awakened had done so with an almost gentle precision. She took a slow breath and whispered, if this place wanted me dead, it had plenty of opportunities already. Professor Celis's voice came through the communicator. Do not assume safety. Ancient technology can behave unpredictably. I know, Mara replied quietly. But panic gets people killed faster than curiosity. She carefully knelt and examined the floor. A thin layer of dust covered the smooth metallic surface, completely undisturbed except for the footprints she had just made. No previous visitors, she murmured. What do you mean? Asked Thalek. If military expeditions entered this structure over the past 4,000 years, there would be tracks, debris, damaged walls, something. There's nothing. So they never found it? Either they never found it, or something prevented them from reaching it. The possibility sent another wave of uneasy silence through the observation ships. Moving cautiously, Mara advanced deeper into the corridor. The architecture was unlike anything preserved in the Galactic archives. There were no sharp decorative edges, no statues celebrating rulers, no military symbols or warning signs. Everything appeared functional. Curved walls blended seamlessly into the ceiling, while faint blue lines beneath the floor pulsed with slow, rhythmic light, almost like veins carrying energy through a living organism. Professor Celis sounded almost breathless. Remarkable. I've never seen engineering like this, Mara admitted. A younger archaeologist asked excitedly, can you identify the civilization? No. The construction style? No. The language? I haven't seen any. The scientist blinked in confusion. No writing at all? None. After another 100 meters, the corridor widened into a vast circular chamber. Mara instinctively stopped. The room was enormous. Its ceiling disappeared high into darkness, supported by graceful columns that curved like giant tree trunks. Along the wall stood dozens of transparent cylindrical chambers, each nearly 5 meters tall. Most were empty. Several had shattered long ago. Others still contained skeletal remains. Not humanoid. Animals. Gigantic animals. One skeleton possessed 6 powerful legs and an elongated neck ending in a skull lined with hundreds of flattened grinding teeth. Another resembled a winged reptile with a wingspan wider than a transport shuttle. A third looked vaguely feline, except its forelimbs ended in 4 massive scythe-like claws. Nobody aboard the observation ship spoke for nearly 20 seconds. Finally, Professor Celis whispered, "Those aren't trophies." Mara slowly nodded. "They're specimens." She approached one intact chamber, shining her flashlight across the transparent surface. "There are nutrient ports." "What does that mean?" Thalek asked. "It means whatever lived inside wasn't displayed." She touched the side of the cylinder. It was being cared for. The realization spread rapidly through every listening scientist. One whispered the impossible conclusion. This wasn't a prison. Mara finished the thought. It was a conservation facility. Before anyone could respond, her scanner emitted a sharp notification. Power source detected. Very weak. Still active. Following the signal, she discovered a waist-high console standing in the center of the chamber. It was covered in dust but otherwise untouched by time. She brushed away centuries of fine gray particles. As her hand contacted the smooth surface, a brilliant blue light suddenly spread beneath her fingertips. The entire console awakened. Several holographic symbols appeared in the air. None resembled any known written language. The observation ships erupted with excitement. "It's functioning. Can she translate it?" Professor Celis quickly asked. "Mara, don't touch anything else." "I wasn't planning to." She simply observed. The symbols shifted repeatedly before disappearing. Then the console projected something entirely unexpected. A three-dimensional image of the planet appeared above it. Not as it existed now. As it had existed long ago. The forests were smaller. Mountain ranges differed. Massive lakes occupied regions now covered by jungle. Dozens of glowing markers spread across the continents. Mara stared in fascination. "It's a map." The hologram zoomed inward automatically. Each glowing marker transformed into the image of a different creature. Some resembled those already living outside. Others had clearly gone extinct. One scientist gasped. "Those are biological records." Mara nodded slowly. "I think each marker represents a habitat." Thalek frowned. "A habitat for what?" She looked around the chamber filled with preservation cylinders. "For rescued species." Professor Celis inhaled sharply. "My stars." Mara continued studying the projection. "There are hundreds of them." The elderly archaeologist's voice trembled with excitement. The beast pit wasn't built to imprison monsters. It was built to save them. Before anyone could absorb the revelation, another hologram appeared. This one displayed stars. Thousands of them. Lines connected distant systems across the galaxy. Each line ended at the sanctuary world. Mara stared silently. Professor Celis broke the silence first. "They came from everywhere." She nodded. This wasn't one planet's wildlife. She looked around the chamber again. It was the galaxy's. A younger scientist sounded completely overwhelmed. "Who could have built something this enormous?" "No civilization we know." Suddenly, the holographic map flickered violently. Several glowing habitat markers changed from blue to flashing red. An unfamiliar tone echoed through the chamber. Not loud, not threatening, urgent. Mara frowned. Something changed. The console projected another image. One section of the sanctuary glowed bright crimson. Several nearby habitats also began flashing. "What does red mean?" asked Thalek. "I don't know." The warning tone repeated. Professor Celis suddenly reached a conclusion. "If this is a conservation system." Mara looked at him. "Red probably indicates environmental instability." At that exact moment, the communicator crackled with a frantic voice from orbit. "Observation station to Mara." She immediately answered. "Go. We've detected multiple explosions." Her expression changed instantly. "Where?" "Western Hemisphere." She hurried back toward the chamber entrance. "Natural?" "No." Another officer interrupted. "High-energy plasma signatures." Mara stopped in disbelief. "That's impossible." No registered ships entered the quarantine zone. A technician shouted from the background. "We're detecting an unauthorized vessel descending through the northern atmosphere." The observation room erupted into chaos. "Identify it." No transponder. No diplomatic authorization. No assembly clearance. Professor Celis spoke quietly. Someone ignored the quarantine. Mara's face hardened. Not someone. She remembered the heated debates in the assembly. The corporations demanding access. The delegates arguing the creatures should be captured instead of studied. Her stomach tightened. "They've come for the animals." As if confirming her fears, distant vibrations rolled through the ancient structure. Even underground she could feel them. Boom, boom, boom. Not earthquakes. Weapons. The holographic map updated again. More habitat markers turned red. The urgent warning tone echoed continuously now. Mara looked from the flashing map to the preservation chambers surrounding her. For the first time since arriving, genuine fear crossed her face. They're not just attacking wildlife. She looked at the ancient console. They're breaking the entire sanctuary. Far above the jungle, hidden beyond the clouds, a sleek black dropship pierced the atmosphere without broadcasting a single identification signal. Painted across its hull was the emblem of Helix Dominion, the largest private xenobiological corporation in known space. Its mission orders were brutally simple: capture living specimens, eliminate resistance, recover any ancient technology. They believed they had arrived first. None of them realized that a lone human scientist had already uncovered the greatest secret the galaxy had buried for millions of years. And if the hunters continued firing their weapons, they would awaken far more than frightened animals. They would awaken an entire sanctuary that had spent ages protecting the last survivors of forgotten worlds. Mara forced herself to think instead of panic. The warning tones echoing through the ancient chamber were no longer isolated alerts. More sections of the holographic map continued changing from calm blue to flashing crimson, spreading outward like ripples across a lake. Whatever the intruders were doing on the surface was affecting the sanctuary itself. She quickly activated the recorder on her shoulder. Observation log. Environmental warning has escalated. The sanctuary appears to monitor ecosystem stability in real time. External interference is causing widespread distress. Professor Celis's voice remained calm despite the tension. Mara, your priority is still survival. My survival depends on understanding this place, she answered while studying the holographic display. If I don't know what these warnings mean, I could walk straight into the problem. Speaker Thalek interrupted. We've tracked the unauthorized dropship. It landed approximately 62 kilometers northwest of your position. Can you identify them now? A brief pause followed. Then Thalek answered grimly. Yes. Who? Helix Dominion. Mara closed her eyes for a second. I was afraid you'd say that. One of the younger scientists sounded confused. You've heard of them? They're the largest private xenobiological corporation in the galaxy. Officially, they study dangerous wildlife. Unofficially, she sighed, they capture anything rare enough to sell. Professor Celis muttered bitterly, living creatures reduced to collectibles. The communicator filled with another voice, this one belonging to a military intelligence officer. We're intercepting fragments of their encrypted communications. Can you decode them? Thalek asked. Partially. A few seconds later the officer read aloud. Primary objective: recover ancient technology. Secondary objective: secure living specimens. Lethal force authorized if necessary. Silence followed. Mara stared at the flashing habitat markers. They're not here to study. No, they're here to loot. She looked around the preservation chamber once more. The skeletal remains inside the transparent cylinders no longer seemed mysterious. They're walking into a wildlife sanctuary carrying weapons. Her voice became noticeably firmer. That's the worst possible thing they could do. Meanwhile, dozens of kilometers away, the Helix Dominion expedition advanced through the jungle in heavy-powered armor. Plasma rifles scanned every shadow while hovering drones buzzed overhead. Massive tracked vehicles crushed ancient ferns beneath reinforced treads, leaving deep scars across the forest floor. Commander Varric, leader of the expedition, studied a holographic terrain map. Our satellites confirmed unusual energy signatures beneath this region. One technician nodded confidently. If ancient technology still functions, we'll own discoveries worth trillions. A younger mercenary hesitated. What about the quarantine stories? The commander laughed. Stories are useful. They kept competitors away. Another explosion echoed through the jungle as engineers blasted apart a wall of giant trees blocking the convoy. Nearby, hundreds of brightly colored creatures burst from the canopy in terrified flight. Back inside the sanctuary, another section of the holographic map turned red. Mara watched the change happen in real time. There, Professor Celis asked, another habitat? No, she enlarged the projection. It follows their movement. Thalek immediately understood. The sanctuary is tracking the expedition. It isn't just tracking them. She pointed towards several nearby blue markers that had begun changing direction. The animals are moving. One xenobiologist leaned closer to his monitor. They're fleeing. No, Mara corrected after several seconds of observation. They're avoiding. The distinction puzzled everyone. What difference does that make? Someone asked. A frightened stampede moves randomly. She watched another cluster of markers. These are organized. One habitat after another adjusted its movement. Predators retreated. Herbivores altered migration paths. Even flying creatures changed direction. The entire ecosystem seemed to be reacting like a single living network. Professor Celis whispered in amazement. It's coordinating. Before Mara could respond, the chamber lights dimmed. The holographic map disappeared. For one alarming second everything went completely dark. Then a single beam of pale blue light descended into the center of the room. Particles of light slowly gathered together. A shape began forming. The observation ships fell completely silent. The glowing figure gradually became clearer. It stood roughly human-sized but possessed no distinct species. Its body appeared composed entirely of shimmering blue light flowing gently beneath a translucent surface. Smooth features suggested a face without belonging to any known civilization. The figure opened luminous eyes. Then it spoke. Its voice was calm, warm, almost gentle. Environmental instability detected. Every person listening froze. Professor Celis whispered, "Artificial intelligence." The glowing figure turned toward Mara. For several seconds neither spoke. Then it tilted its head slightly. Biological designation. Unrecognized. Mara swallowed carefully. "My name is Mara Hayes." The figure remained silent. She continued, "I come from the planet Earth." Several blue symbols flowed across its body. Database search. Seconds passed. Then, no matching civilization. The observation room erupted. "Impossible. Earth isn't in its records." Professor Celis's excitement overcame his caution. "Mara, ask how old it is." Before she could speak, the figure looked upward toward the unseen ceiling. Chronological calculation. It paused. 3,214,612 local orbital cycles since primary administrator contact. Every scientist stopped breathing. Finally, one whispered the number aloud. Over 3 million years. No known civilization had survived even a fraction of that time. Mara steadied herself. "You built this sanctuary?" The glowing figure answered without emotion. "Negative. You maintain it?" "Affirmative. What should I call you?" There was another brief pause. "Designation. Custodian 7. Mara nodded politely. "Custodian 7. The sanctuary is in danger." "I am aware. You've detected the intruders?" "Affirmative. Then why aren't you stopping them?" The AI looked directly at her. "Operational limitations." "What limitations?" "My directive." "And what is your directive?" Its answer chilled everyone listening. "Preserve life." Mara frowned. "Then preserve it." "I am." She shook her head. "They're destroying habitats. They are biological life. So are the animals. They are biological life." Realization slowly dawned across her face. "You can't choose." The AI remained perfectly still. "My directive prohibits preferential preservation between intelligent and non-intelligent biological organisms." Professor Celis suddenly understood. It literally cannot decide whose lives matter more. Mara looked back at the holographic being. "So you're watching both sides destroy each other? Because saving one by harming the other would violate your core programming." "Affirmative." For the first time, Mara saw something unexpected. Not emotion, but conflict. Millions of years of flawless programming trapped inside an impossible moral equation. Another explosion echoed faintly through the underground structure. Several warning lights began flashing again. Custodian 7 turned its glowing gaze toward the ceiling. Environmental degradation accelerating. Mara took a determined step forward. "Then let me help." The AI looked back at her. "You possess no sanctuary authorization." "No. You possess no administrative authority." "No. You possess no recognized civilization." She smiled faintly. "Apparently not." The AI remained silent. Then it asked a question that surprised everyone listening. "Human Mara Hayes, why do you wish to preserve organisms that are capable of killing you?" Mara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she remembered the mountain beast shielding its young, the orderly migration routes, the untouched forests, and the ancient chambers built to protect creatures no one else remembered. Finally she spoke. "Because they were here first." For the first time since awakening, Custodian 7 did not answer immediately. It simply stood motionless, as though processing an idea it had never encountered before. Above them, another distant explosion shook dust from the ancient ceiling, and somewhere deep within the sanctuary, mechanisms that had slept for millions of years began quietly preparing for whatever would happen next. Custodian 7 remained motionless for several long seconds after Mara's answer. The glowing patterns flowing beneath its translucent body slowed noticeably, as though millions of years of calculations were being reconsidered. Around them, the warning lights continued pulsing crimson, casting long shadows across the ancient preservation chamber. The sanctuary was still in danger, but for the first time since awakening, the caretaker AI seemed to be evaluating something beyond its original programming. Finally, the AI spoke. Statement acknowledged. Mara folded her arms. That's all? My response database contains no established protocol for your reasoning. A faint smile crossed her face. That's because not everything fits inside a protocol. Professor Celis chuckled softly over the communicator. I believe you've just confused a 3 million-year-old artificial intelligence. Custodian 7 tilted its head toward the unseen source of the voice. External observers detected. Thalek immediately answered. We mean no harm. The AI paused briefly. Your transmission originates from orbital vessels. Correct. Orbital vessels possess planetary bombardment capability. The observation deck became uncomfortably quiet. Technically, one military officer admitted. We're not here to attack, Thalek added quickly. Custodian 7 simply replied, statement recorded. Mara recognized the subtle difference. It hadn't said, accepted. Only, recorded. Another tremor rolled through the underground chamber, stronger than the previous ones. Tiny fragments of dust drifted from the ceiling. The holographic map reappeared automatically, and another cluster of habitats flashed red. Custodian 7 turned toward the projection. Environmental integrity reduced by 2.7%. Professor Celis frowned. Only a few explosions caused that much damage? The AI answered immediately. Explosions are not the primary concern. Mara looked up. Then what is? The holographic display zoomed into the intruder's location. Dozens of small symbols appeared around the expedition. Some pulsed rapidly. Others spread outward through the surrounding forest. Custodian 7 explained. They are deploying biological capture devices. Mara's expression darkened. Nerve traps. One of the assembly scientists asked, You recognize the technology? Unfortunately, she watched as several moving blue markers suddenly stopped. They're not killing everything. No, they're capturing anything valuable. The AI confirmed her conclusion. 37 sanctuary organisms immobilized. Another warning appeared. 8 juvenile organisms separated from parental units. Mara clenched her fists. They're taking babies. Far across the jungle, Commander Varric stood beside a massive hovering containment crate. Inside, a colorful 6-legged creature struggled weakly against an energy field while technicians secured biological scanners around it. One mercenary looked toward the surrounding trees. Commander, something feels wrong. What now? The forest. He hesitated. It's gone quiet. Varric laughed. Animals run from loud noises. No. The mercenaries slowly turned in a full circle. They've stopped running. The commander finally noticed it too. Not a single bird called. Not one insect buzzed. Even the wind seemed strangely absent. The jungle wasn't empty. It was watching. Back inside the sanctuary, Mara looked toward Custodian 7. Can you communicate with the animals? The AI answered without hesitation. I do not command sanctuary organisms. Can you warn them? I continuously broadcast environmental status signals. She frowned. So they already know. Affirmative. Professor Celis suddenly leaned toward his microphone. Mara, ask whether the sanctuary has defensive systems. She immediately repeated the question. Custodian 7 remained silent for several seconds before answering. Affirmative. Hope spread across the observation ships. Thalek spoke first. Activate them. The AI looked directly at Mara instead of the communicator. My defensive systems preserve life. Good. They cannot intentionally terminate biological organisms. Mara nodded. I wouldn't ask you to. The AI continued. Current threat assessment predicts 84% probability that defensive intervention will increase fatalities. She understood immediately. If your defenses activate now, frightened animals and armed hunters will collide. Affirmative. Professor Celis sighed. So once again, your programming traps you. Another urgent alarm echoed through the chamber. The holographic map zoomed automatically toward a river valley. Several enormous blue markers were moving rapidly. One assembly zoologist stared in disbelief. "What are those?" Custodian 7 answered. "Mountain guardian herd." Mara's eyes widened. "The creatures I met yesterday." The markers continued advancing, straight toward the Helix Dominion expedition. "They're migrating," one officer observed. Mara shook her head. "No." She studied the movement carefully. "They're retrieving their young." The realization struck everyone at once. The expedition had unknowingly captured juvenile animals. Now their parents were coming. Not for revenge. For rescue. She looked at the AI. "If they reach the hunters." Custodian 7 completed her thought. "Estimated casualties exceed 70%. Another scientist whispered nervously. "The hunters will open fire. And every nearby animal will interpret that as an attack," Mara added. She turned back toward the AI. "You have to let me stop them. You possess no authority." "I don't need authority. You possess insufficient physical capability." "I know. You possess high probability of fatality." She smiled faintly. "I noticed." The AI remained completely still. Then it asked, "Why continue?" Mara looked toward the glowing map where blue markers and red symbols moved steadily closer together. "Because someone has to stand between fear and misunderstanding." Silence filled the chamber. Even the scientist stopped speaking. Custodian 7 slowly extended one glowing hand toward the holographic display. Several pathways illuminated across the map. One narrow route glowed bright green. Analysis complete. Mara stepped closer. "What is this?" "Lowest probability route to interception point." Her eyes followed the path. "It avoids every major predator territory." "Correct. It also avoids the hunters." "Correct." Professor Sellis suddenly understood. "It's showing you a shortcut." The AI nodded once. "Travel immediately." Mara adjusted the straps on her backpack. "I thought you said I had no authority." "You do not. Then why help me?" For the first time, Custodian 7 paused noticeably before answering. Its glowing eyes focused on Mara. "You proposed an operational variable not previously calculated." She smiled. "And what's that?" The AI's response was almost thoughtful. "Coexistence." Before anyone could speak again, a hidden section of the chamber walls silently slid open. Beyond it stretched a narrow underground passage illuminated by the same soft blue light. Unlike the main corridors, this tunnel sloped gently upward toward the surface. Custodian 7 gestured toward the opening. "Ancient maintenance transit route." Professor Sellis sounded astonished. "It leads outside?" "Affirmative." Mara checked her equipment one final time. Water, medical kit, field scanner, notebook. Everything else would have to depend on experience. Speaker Thalik's voice came through the communicator. "Mara." "Yes?" "If this becomes impossible." She smiled before he could finish. "You'll tell me to come back." "Yes." She looked toward the glowing tunnel. "If I leave now, those animals die. And if you go, I might." Neither of them said anything for a moment. Finally, Thalik spoke quietly. "Then, good luck." Mara nodded once. "I'll need more than luck." She stepped into the hidden passage without looking back. Behind her, the stone doorway closed silently, sealing Custodian 7 once more inside the sanctuary's ancient heart. The AI watched the empty corridor for several seconds before turning back toward the holographic map. For the first time in over 3 million years, one of its calculations no longer ended with a predictable outcome. A single human had introduced a possibility that its creators had never programmed into its endless equations. Not victory. Not domination. Hope. Above ground, less than 20 kilometers away, Commander Varric raised his rifle as enormous branches began snapping somewhere deep within the silent forest. One of his nervous mercenaries whispered, "Commander, I think something's coming." The ground answered before anyone else could. A deep, rhythmic tremor rolled through the jungle. Then another. And another. The mountain guardians were almost there.